Hi everyone, welcome to another video. You're not going to guess where we are today, or maybe some of you will guess where we are, but we're in beautiful Lisbon. It's not the best day, not the best weather, but we're going to continue regardless. So in today's video, we're meeting one of our friends, Leanne Mumford, who works here in Lisbon, and she helps lots of people from different countries find their dream rental home. And she's going to be putting all of our knowledge that we mentioned in our video to the test. She's also going to be telling us how COVID has impacted the rental market and giving us an insight into various areas that you might want to check out if you want to rent. Welcome to the channel, Leanne.
Thank you.
I'm so excited. Well, we are very excited to have you here. And you are a renting in Lisbon extraordinaire, a guru. So could you tell us a bit more about you, who you are, and what you do?
So I'm Leanne. I came to Portugal 3 years ago. And yes, I work for Coldwell Banker and do rentals and sales around Lisbon, Cascais, Setúbal district.
Okay. So this is your
yes, this is my workplace.
Queen of renting in Lisbon. Amazing. So we're just recovering from COVID,
yes,
which has been horrible.
Yeah.
Luckily, things are opening up again. So with that in mind, can you tell us about how COVID has impacted the market, the renting market?
We had a lot of short-term rentals that went on the market for long-term rents. Mm-hmm. They are going back to short-term rentals now, so it's getting
mm-hmm.
getting a bit difficult to find furnished apartments for long-term rentals.
Okay.
Prices were very negotiable. In general, like usually you can negotiate everything in Portugal.
Yeah.
But that's also getting a bit more tight now because
now things are starting to pick up. Prices are sort of getting back to normal.
Yeah.
And what we saw was a lot of properties that were on for Airbnb. They were then available for longer term renting contracts.
Exactly.
Is that changing now? Are there more Airbnbs? Are the owners, are you finding that they're putting them back on Airbnb, or are you still finding a large number that are still for renting?
No, they're going back to Airbnb.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you talked about furnished apartments, which is a really big point here in Portugal.
Yeah.
So tell us, for those people who don't know, who want to come here to rent, is it difficult typically to find furnished apartments? What do you see more of, furnished or unfurnished?
Unfurnished.
Okay.
Yeah, because all the furnished ones are going back on the Airbnb market, so it's getting quite difficult at the moment to find furnished apartments.
Okay.
And often here you have more like the furnished ones that are still there. You have like the granny kind of, like what grandma didn't need goes in that apartment.
Yeah, all the leftover furniture,
you get that a lot.
Yeah, and in terms of the prices overall, what trends are you seeing with the prices for rentals? Are you finding, you said about them being more negotiable, but are you finding them coming down quite significantly? Are you finding them like 20% less than normal, or what are you seeing?
Usually it's around 10%. You can get more, but rarely. Mm-hmm. But around 10% you can usually negotiate.
Wow. Okay.
So yeah.
Amazing. Okay. So Lisbon is always popular. It's always popping. I mean, we can see why. But the thing is it's very expensive. Whether you want to rent or whether you want to buy, it's still expensive, especially when you compare it to other parts of Portugal. So with that in mind, what areas would you say inside of Lisbon are most affordable What are the ones that are up and coming that people should think about, apart from all the famous ones that we know?
Yeah.
You know, what areas would you say people should look at?
More affordable. It's always a bit more affordable if you go a little bit more on the outskirts, like for example Benfica.
Okay.
That's not very popular among expats, but you will find some, but it's more Portuguese. Maybe also towards Alvalade.
But don't you have to be a Benfica fan to live in Benfica?
Maybe you shouldn't hate it.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. And other areas, what sort of?
What is also a very nice area is Parque das Nações. It's not the typical Portuguese charming area because everything is really new there, but it's very green. It's right next to the river. You can also find more furnished apartments around there.
And they're quite reasonably priced.
Exactly.
Because it's a stunning area, isn't
Yeah.
it? It's really stunning.
Yeah.
So I'm actually surprised there's anything affordable there.
Yeah,
it's beautiful. Thinking about areas outside of Lisbon, in your experience, what would you say are good areas for people to explore?
So of course Cascais is very popular, but it's also very pricey.
Yeah.
It's not cheap.
Yeah.
You can always look on the other side of the river, like Almada.
Okay.
It's more cheap.
Okay.
But it's up and coming. It doesn't have the Portuguese charm as well.
Okay.
But it's super close to Lisbon. It's like, you know, you take the ferry, you're here in central Lisbon in 10 minutes.
Wow, okay.
It also has like a nice street with restaurants and you've got everything there. It's not a small town. You have public transport and it's really a good area to explore.
So tell me, with the areas on the other side of the bridge, what sort of, like you just mentioned Almada,
yes.
Almada, who would that be good for? Would it be good for families? Would it be good for people coming here to retire who may be a bit more mature? Or would it be good for single people? What sort of crowd do you get there, just to have a feeling of, you know, who lives there typically?
It's a total mix.
Okay.
It's a total mix. You have families there, like you have kids playing on the street. It's very nice. You have older people living there. You have like some expats living there.
Okay.
It's a total mix of everyone.
That's great.
I think the population is over 100,000, so it's not a small town.
It's not tiny.
Yeah.
And of course, it's near the beach.
Yes.
You've got Costa da Caparica.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there are lots of others. That's the only one that I know. But there's all. You've got the coast going all the way down to Setúbal.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So if you're new to Portugal, if you're coming here, and you want to live close to Lisbon, but you don't want to live in Lisbon, tell me what should people be looking out for? What other areas, for example, on the Cascais line or on the other side of the bridge, should people be looking at?
So along the Linha de Cascais, it's a train line directly from Lisbon to Cascais. You have a lot of little towns. Also a lot of beach towns like Carcavelos is like one of the longest beaches there. It's like I think around 2.5 kilometers long, and you have a nice little town center. Also the public transport, everything in walking distance, and Parede is a little bit more residential. Then you have Passo de Arcos, which is also super cute.
Great.
So you have those areas along there, and then on the other side of the bridge you have Almada, which is super close to Lisbon, and you have Setúbal, where you have a direct train into Lisbon. I think it takes around, depending on which train you get, like 45 minutes to 1 hour 15. It's also a very nice, cute little town, which is more charming in the inside, and then outside of the town center you have a bit more high rises, but it's also still very nice to live. Yes.
Brilliant. So just tell us about the prices in the different parts, the alternatives to Lisbon. How do they compare?
So along the Linha de Cascais, it's a bit more expensive.
Okay.
Because you're just close to Cascais and Lisbon, you have direct trains here. If you go on the other side of the river, where you still have good public transport into Lisbon, it's a bit cheaper.
Okay.
But you
Brilliant.
might have more difficulties finding furnished places outside
okay.
of Lisbon.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
important to know.
Yeah.
But it's usually...
What would you say the most important things that people need to think about when they're renting in Portugal? What would you say are the things that they must think about or they must do?
First of all, get somebody who you trust that can help you. So you are always on the safe side in terms of the documentation is correct, the lease is correct. For example, our lawyers always check that the lease is according to the laws.
Perfect.
And then be prepared to pay a little bit more rent or deposit up front.
Yes.
Because we as foreigners, we don't have a guarantor, which most landlords want to have.
Yeah.
So someone who jumps in case you stop paying, that they take over for you, and this person has to be like paying taxes in Portugal for the last years.
Yeah. It's
so
quite heavy for someone who's not lived in Portugal before, because it's a huge responsibility being a guarantor.
Yeah.
So is what you're saying that you might have to pay a bit more up front to secure your place?
Yeah.
Okay. And what about protection? So when you rent somewhere in Portugal, does the law typically side on the owner's side, or is there a lot of protection for tenants here in Portugal?
It's very good for tenants here.
Okay, brilliant.
Tenants are very protected. You cannot just get kicked out from one day to the next.
Okay.
And even no matter what actually the lease says, the law will always take over. So if the lease says something that's not according to the law, if you go to court, you will still win.
Perfect.
Yeah.
That's good to know. That's comforting. Some of the other things that we realised here compared to London, for example.
Yes.
So when you rent in London, you go through credit checks, for example, and employer checks, just to make sure you're good on the rent. But as you just mentioned before, because there's a guarantor, and that's in place of credit checks and references. So those things it's not a thing here in Portugal. Okay.
It's not a thing. You don't have credit checks. Nobody checks your workplace.
Okay.
What I always suggest, what is nice, is because we don't have a guarantor or something, to show some proof of income or savings.
Yeah.
So the landlord doesn't know you, so he has some kind of security to know that you're actually able to pay.
Yeah. No, that sounds great. Okay, a lot of people have dogs, including you.
Yes.
So, what is it like to get a rental place here when you've got dogs?
It can be a bit more tricky if you want a furnished place.
Okay.
So they might ask for another deposit up front. Also in unfurnished places, but it's usually a bit easier. I always say it's a very well-behaved dog, so to make sure that the landlord knows.
Comfortable.
Yes.
And would the landlord typically ask you what you're doing with the dog during the day, whether the dog's going to be at home, or they don't ask those detailed questions?
They might ask what kind of dog it is.
Okay.
But not more details.
Not more than that. Okay. And what do you do if the owner asks you for a year in advance? What I mean, some do.
Yeah, I wouldn't.
Should they pay it, or?
I wouldn't go with it.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a lot of money. I never negotiate anything that amount for my clients.
It's a lot
It's
of money.
crazy.
Yeah, and it would take a lot of trust.
Exactly.
Because the money here goes straight to the owner. It doesn't go in any deposit scheme. That doesn't exist here.
Yeah.
Okay. Brilliant.
And you never know what happens.
Yeah.
Like if something's wrong with the apartment I wouldn't suggest doing
Don't do it.
No.
Okay. In terms of documents that you need to be able to rent a place, what documents do you need to show?
You need your NIF, your Portuguese tax number. You will need that for everything here. A copy of your passport, your current address, and that's it.
Perfect. It's easy.
Yes, it's super straightforward.
And have you heard any rental horror stories of people having just something really bad happen? And I think it's important to share those things so people are aware of what can potentially happen.
Yeah.
Have you heard of anything
Yes, you hear stories, especially about not getting the deposit back, for example.
Okay.
Usually these stories happen if you go through private and not through an agent
Yeah.
that can make sure everything's correct.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's the advice, really, just to make sure you get, as you said at the beginning, to make sure that you get someone to help you.
Yeah.
Yep. Very sound advice. And what are the benefits, would you say, to using an agent like yourself versus using a relocation company? Because there are many relocation companies that charge an arm and a leg.
Yes.
You have to have a mortgage, you remortgage your house to be able to afford, they're really expensive. So what would you say are the main differences?
Working with an agent doesn't cost you anything.
Yeah.
I guess. So make sure.
Thing. Yeah.
Yes, I know there are some agents out there that might want to try and charge you something, or like they get the commission from the landlord and from you.
Yeah.
It's not legit. The landlord pays all the commissions here.
Yes. So to keep your costs down.
Yes.
Yeah. To do that.
Exactly.
So we have many people who are planning to come and live in Portugal, but they can't get here at the moment.
Yes.
And they maybe want to rent sight unseen. So tell us about what your experience of that is, and the advice that you would offer to those people.
Yeah. I have a lot of clients doing that, especially for the D7 visa.
Yes.
I think it's very important, first of all, to talk to a few agents, find one that you trust, who takes the time to understand your needs.
Yes.
And then do a video call, make sure you can ask the agent anything.
Yes.
No matter how crazy you might think it is, the agent has to be your senses. Like, has to be your smell, has to be like whatever you hear outside, whatever you see. Ask them to open the cupboards, like the fridge, whatever you want to do, ask them anything. I also find it very practical to always make a video afterwards to send to my clients, because it goes so quickly, and then they can have another look. And also ask your agent to show you the outside area.
Yeah, very important.
So, because you can't see the area, you don't know what the street is like.
Yeah. The building is important as well, because there's many historical buildings.
Yes.
Which you want to make sure you're getting a building that's at least maintained.
Yes.
To some degree. Yeah. No, that's good advice. If you were doing a sight unseen, does it work in the same way in terms of paying deposits and everything else? How does all that work? If you can't get here, how?
Yes.
How does the money work?
So usually it works the same way.
Okay.
You can even transfer the money from your foreign bank account into Portugal. It takes a few days, but we send a proof of transfer to the landlord, then it's fine. Then the signing of the lease. Sometimes the landlord is fine with you just signing electronically from home, the PDF. And then sign in person once you arrive, so everybody has an original copy. Sometimes they request a power of attorney.
Okay.
So you will have to set that up here, but it's rarely, but it can happen.
It can. So for those people who are not here yet, what sorts of things do they need to think about if they want to rent somewhere sight unseen?
Yes.
What are the typical questions you get?
Make sure that there are, like, if you have a dog, for example, or children, make sure there are parks nearby. So it can be a bit tricky in Lisbon, for example, to have a nice big green space or somewhere where you can let your dog just run.
Yes, yeah.
And of course, make sure you have supermarkets close by, especially in some areas. You don't have big supermarkets. Like the older parts of Lisbon, for example, don't have big supermarkets. They have a lot of corner shops, but that's it.
Yeah.
And of course, like public transport, how far is it away? On some parts, you don't always have the metro, the underground. You just have like the tram, but that's still accessible throughout Lisbon. So these things are important to look at.
And I think looking at mobility as well, if you need to be somewhere where it's a bit flatter, I think it's worth, saying that to your real estate agent to get you to look at areas that don't have serious hills.
Yeah, and the cobblestones, they get very slippery when it's wet.
That's true.
Yeah,
so true. Another big thing is parking is a nightmare in Lisbon. But I know there are some rentals that come with a car parking space.
Yes.
I think we only saw one when we were looking in Lisbon. So there's not many,
Yes.
but they do exist.
Yes.
Perfect.
Yeah, and it's important if you can get one, if you want a car,
Yeah.
to get a parking space with
Yeah.
your...
Yeah.
It might cost a little bit more, but it's totally worth it.
Parking's not cheap in Lisbon. I think that's a point of saying, because if you don't have a parking space outside your home, then you have to go to one of the central parking spaces, which might be a distance from your property, and you might have to pay €10 a day or something like that. It's not
usually,
inexpensive.
Yeah, as a resident, you can get like a resident badge,
perfect.
and you can park on the street in your area for free.
Perfect. That's a good tip. In terms of transport, if people don't want to use their car, or they just, they don't want a car, full stop. Tell us about public transport.
Yeah, you have good public transport throughout Lisbon. You also have Bolt and Uber and everything. It's quite cheap.
Yeah.
What you want to consider is if you have a dog, for example, that they are not allowed on the buses or on the trams.
Okay.
So
I didn't know that.
Yeah, they're only allowed on the underground or on the normal trains. So then you might want to consider getting a car if you want to take your dog out regularly for runs.
Yeah, excellent. Or of course, you can get a bike.
Yeah. If you're brave enough.
Maybe not with your dog in a basket. Yeah. Although I have seen that, but maybe not around Lisbon. It's quite dangerous.
Yes.
But that's so true.
Yeah.
People are really brave, and without helmets as well. Yeah. They're cycling around. I'm like, wow.
On wet cobblestones.
On wet cobblestones.
Yeah, and hills. I wouldn't drive a bike here.
Yeah. So, Leanne, thank you so much for the interview. It's really insightful. And if people want to work with you and they want to get in touch with you, we will leave your contact details down in the description box.
Yes, you're welcome.